All right, it looks like we're live. It's on air on my screen here. Welcome everybody to this second webinar in our TP Lab series. And thank you everyone for joining and choosing to spend a bit of your morning learning about the wonderful world of operational transfer pricing. My name is Jens and I'm a partner in our value chain and transformation practice, where I specialize mainly in business integrations and the link between transfer pricing and our broader advisory offerings, including the tax and transfer pricing aspects of data analytics, ERP design implementation, and the topic of the day, operational transfer pricing. I'll be anchoring today's session. I'll do my best to manage any questions that may come in from the audience. As mentioned, today's topic is operational transfer pricing. I'll leave the two esteemed gentlemen, Daniel and Lewis, to define that term in a little bit more detail in a minute. But from a 30,000 feet perspective, it's all about living your transfer pricing policies in an efficient, accurate, and transparent manner. During our last webinar, we briefly demoed an example of such a tool, a relatively simple tool for tracking the profitability of manufacturing entities in a multinational group. The purpose of today is to take one or two steps back from that and also, of course, show a few demos, but before that, take a few steps back and consider when operational transfer pricing applications should be considered, could or should be considered, and we can share our experience from the journeys that we've been on with some of our clients and continue to be on with clients. Before I hand it over to Daniel and Lewis, just a couple of practicalities that I got aware of from doing some of the test runs of this. One is, if you have any questions, please type them in the Q&A section of the WebEx. We'll do our best to answer them during the Q&A session towards the end of the session, or we can take them offline subsequent to the session. The session is being recorded for offline viewing, and the slides that are being shown on screen, or at least the front page of those slides, are available online, just to get those potential questions out of the way to start with. Before I hand it to Daniel and Lewis, I'll do a very brief intro. Daniel is a senior manager in our transfer pricing and value chain transformation practice, works very closely with me on a lot of our business integration projects, and heads up our operational transfer pricing efforts across our practice, and will basically also lead the first part of the session today. Lewis is a senior associate in our team and a digital accelerator, as you can maybe see from his beautiful sweatshirt, and they will both take us through today's agenda in a second. So Daniel, will you take it from here?
Yeah, thank you, Jens. I'll be happy to do so. So for today's webinar, we want to cover three main topics. Firstly, we want to level set on what it actually means when we're talking about operational transfer pricing, as there are quite many different definitions floating around out there. Furthermore, we want to talk about some of the common OpTP issues and use cases which we see when we're working with our clients, and how the toolkit that we have available within operational transfer pricing can help in these cases. Secondly, we want to present, but also discuss some of the multiple options that are available to you when you're thinking about automating or systemizing the way that you're working with your transfer prices. And then lastly, which is the third bullet on the agenda, we want to show you an example of a pricing engine which we have built using low no-code software. This was built by Lewis and others in our team to basically help our clients manage their intercompany pricing, including adjustments to specific target margins. But Lewis will go through this example in more details later. But moving to the next slide. So with this slide, we wanted to capture what operational transfer pricing is about. As I started out by saying, there's a lot of definitions on OpTP out there. But when we are talking about operational transfer pricing, what we mean is, and as Jens alluded to, is really how we bring our transfer pricing policies to life. Here on this slide, we've implemented or illustrated it by the implementation box in the middle of the slide. Of course, implementation is of course nested firmly within our transfer pricing process from defining our TP strategy, which of course is formed by internal and external factors such as the industry we are operating in, value chain specifics, the geopolitical environment, and so on, to the defense of our policies and of our realized results of the year. But if we zoom in on the implementation part, there's really multiple elements to how we bring our policies to life, such as how we work with getting the right data from different data sources, such as our ERP system. How do we clean the data, structure the data so it's fit for purpose? It, of course, also includes how we calculate our prices using our data. It includes how we invoice our calculated prices and manage interdependencies between other processes, for example, joint processes with finance or others within the tax department. And lastly, it includes how we monitor our pricing and how we monitor our results and how we identify if actions are needed to align pricing to our policies. But across all these elements and operational transfer pricing in general, we can think about two dimensions which provide the foundation for how we work with operational transfer pricing. And these two dimensions are what we typically name data and technology and people, processes, and governance. These two dimensions are very different, but equally important to successfully manage and bring your policies to life, basically. Data and technology, of course, refers to our data and what we do to it. It's within this space that we typically use different types of softwares or technologies to help us calculate and manage our pricing. While the people, processes, and governance space really refers to the way that we work with our policies and the procedures that we set up around them. So this could, for example, be setting up standard operating procedures or other types of governance structures that can help delegate roles and responsibilities in relation to your policies. When we're going to talk a little bit later on in the slides, when we're going to talk about the different options that are available to you when you're going to use software to automate your operational transfer pricing, and as well as the example that Louis will show later, this mainly refers to the data and technology dimension on this slide. But having defined what we mean by operational transfer pricing, and when we talk about operational transfer pricing with our client, I think we can move on to talk about some of the common issues that we see within this space. So just moving to the next slide here. So this slide lists some of the issues that we see when we're working with our clients within this area, and where we see a lot of benefit coming out of mitigating those issues. The first 4 bullets touch upon some similar issues and pain points, and revolves around the need for standardized and clearly communicated procedures to avoid inefficient ways of working, potential mistakes and errors. We have, for example, seen cases out at clients where data mismatches can arise from the fact that they get data from multiple different data sources, such as from local finance teams, where it might not reconcile to group accounts. It can also be that we have local teams that actually do not book the same costs in the same accounts. From a TP point of view, of course, we need to be able to reconcile the data that we use to set prices so that we can be consistent across the group. I think here operational transfer pricing can really help, both in terms of setting up clear governance, but also automating and aligning typical manual data gathering processes, and thereby eliminating potential manual errors, mismatches in data between data sources, and so on. Having an over-reliance on a specific function hero might also create some risks if that person decides to leave the company. taking a lot of knowledge with them. Again, we can benefit from documenting our procedures, which may allow others to step in that case. But it may also actually help to free up time for that functional hero to work on something that might be even more value adding. Then when we're talking about speed and frequency of calculations, we typically see issues around large and potentially delayed year-end adjustments. Depending on where you're located, this may be an issue given local tax regulations that may not allow for year-end adjustments, or tax authorities that may challenge you on it. This was also something that was touched upon in the last webinar. We really want to keep updates as frequent as practically possible to avoid these sizable adjustments and stay compliant. I think this point will also become even more key for those of you who will be impacted by Pillar 2, as we need to be able to make these year-end adjustments more quickly, as these will otherwise not count towards your local ETR calculations, which may actually result in top of tax that could have been avoided. Then the last two bullets revolved around the increasing need for transparency and the ability to show your audit trail to tax authorities and other stakeholders to provide comfort that you've actually implemented your policies correctly. We're seeing an increased focus from the tax authorities in this area, and I've actually worked on a couple of cases recently where the tax authorities have initially expressed some concern about the implementation of the group's policies. In these cases, we've been able to help the company set up procedures and automation that have given the tax authorities, I would say, sufficient comfort to actually close down the audits, basically, which is of course really nice for the companies involved. So these were some of the common issues that we've seen.
Daniel, before you move on, I think there's a question coming from the audience that I'll, in slight paraphrasing, is really focused on what you just touched on here, whether we've seen penalties or the like coming out of issues due to lack of accurate implementation of transfer pricing policies, which is actually quite an interesting question in the sense that I personally haven't seen penalties linked to just the inaccurate implementation of policies. There's kind of two angles to it. One is if you don't do the right adjustments, of course, you're opening yourself up to actual adjustments. So that might be, let's say, the actual outcome of the audit. The other, and to some extent, maybe more imminent problem is that if your policies are not correctly implemented, you start out by being significantly behind on points in an audit. I've been through a couple of audits recently, and I know of a lot of others where you spend quite a lot of time, and perhaps others in the audience know of similar cases where you spend too much time not discussing the subject matter of the case, but end up discussing, okay, why was the margin 5 when you said it should have been 4? So there's a lot of, let's say, efficiencies through audits to be gained by being really accurate, and Daniel's earlier point on having the right audit trail and show, okay, this is our policy, this is how it all got implemented, and in the end became an invoice and actually becomes statutory accounts. So yeah, it's a good question, but I think it's more linked to the problems arising from actually explaining why what you said you were going to do was not what you actually ended up doing. So yeah, sorry, Daniel, please carry on.
Yeah, but yeah, I echo that, Jens. It's a really good point and actually a really good question as well. And I've seen some of the same things. So this was some of the common issues that we typically encounter. But another way of looking at this is also looking at what are some of the common use cases where we see operational transfer pricing, and the way that we work with it can bring a lot of value. So moving on to the next slide here. And in the interest of time, I'll keep this slide fairly short. But I would just like to highlight that the typical use cases that we see are not really limited to any particular type of transaction. Just looking, at the four top topics here, from left to right, operational transfer pricing is really relevant when we are thinking about our trade of goods transactions, our service transactions, working with our intangibles, our royalties. When we are thinking about our financing transactions, how we work with these, all the things we do besides, let's say, for example, for cost pooling, many of us has systems that from our banks and so on that handle all the calculations. But do we need to add anything in terms of specific TP considerations on top of this that we need to somehow automate into the process, into talking to these banking systems? Some of this is what we're seeing, but just saying it's not really limited to the type of transaction, which will also become clear in Lewis's example later. Furthermore, looking at the bottom left topic, through automation, operational transfer pricing also allows us to gain more real-time insights into how our transfer pricing setup is doing, how are margins developing in your entities, even on a split P&L basis for those entities that might have combined functions, where these type of calculations may have been too cumbersome to do manually in real time, but automation allows us to do that now. And then, continuing from left to right and in the bottom row, as we also talked about earlier on the last slide, OpTP can help speed up year-end calculations and increase the frequency of charging. Furthermore, it can help gather data and transform it, including integration with your ERP system, allowing also for multiple stakeholders to work together in a more coordinated way. And lastly, it can also help increase situational awareness, allow you to stay on top of future developments by applying scenario analysis, scenario planning, as well as impact analysis, for example, on key measures such as ETR calculations or Pillar 2 safe harbor calculations and so on. Yeah. So moving to the next session, and I hope really the last couple of sections gave you a nice intro to what it means when we are talking about operational transfer pricing and some of the common things that we see when we're working within this space. The next slide is more on that data and technology dimension that we saw earlier on if we choose to use software to automate our operational transfer pricing, what should we then consider? So this next slide, we've tried to present some of the multiple options that you have available when you're thinking about automating or maybe just systemizing the way that you're working with your transfer prices. There are many ways of thinking and ordering these type of different solutions that can help you automate, but in the end, it really depends on what is the problem that we're trying to solve, or maybe said in a different way, what is it that we want to achieve? So typically we see as the need for more functionality increases, as the need for more integration with, for example, different data sources such as the ERP system, as the need increases, then solutions typically become more time consuming to implement. They generally are more costly to purchase and operate. And they also require alignment across more internal stakeholders. It's not just a tax exercise anymore. But yes, starting from left to right, but starting in the left, we have the good and trusted old Excel, which can already do so many things and it's great for so many different purposes. where Excel kind of starts to struggle is if we're working with repeated tasks, because Excel is prone to manual errors. For example, when we update data, right? Maybe a number is missing in the copy pasted data that we didn't notice. Maybe we missed a cell when redoing a sum. All these things can happen when we're working with Excel in a very manual way. Furthermore, Excel also starts to struggle when we're working with larger data sets and becomes very slow to respond and maybe even crash on us when we're working with these larger data sets. Then looking to the far right of the slide, we have these more complex solutions that are either bolted on or embedded within the ERP system. So these either sit as a bolt-on to your ERP system or lives within it, extracting data, doing calculations, and then feeding it back into the system. These are typically ready-made solutions that require that you adapt somewhat to them, and as they have limited flexibility. However, it may actually be worth looking into these type of solutions if you're going to migrate your ERP system at some point, such as we're seeing right now with S/4HANA. Since the ERP system in those migrations will already be open, it will be far less complex basically to implement an embedded solution than if the system is already up and running. However, in any case, it will still be a complex and costly exercise no matter what. But in any cases, in those migration processes, we really recommend that the tax department get a seat at the table when discussing new features of this new ERP system, to ensure that we have the right data and the right functionality to basically bring our policies to life. Then in the middle of the graph, we have what we refer to as low no-code software or solutions such as Alteryx, which has really seen a lot of development in the last couple of years. It's really a happy medium or a sweet spot between the simplicity of Excel on one side and the automation and integration features of the more complex solutions on the other side. These low-code, no-code softwares really allows us to work more tactically and selectively in terms of what we want to do. Do we want to automate only part of a transaction or a transaction process, where the parts where we are struggling the most, or potentially we can and want to automate all of our processes? It really depends on what you need and where you see the most value can be created for you. So these software programs allows both flexibility and also scalability, but without the same level of costs as we see with the more complex solutions. And to kind of round off this slide, and as I started out by saying, whichever option you go for really depends on what you want to solve and achieve.
Thank you, Daniel. I think I'll hand it over to Lewis in a second, but I really do think that this slide that we're pausing on at the moment is a little bit important. Some projects, some clients can benefit quite a lot from some of the solutions on the far right side, but as Daniel mentioned, it comes with quite a lot of complexity and costs. Not to say that it can't be done, but it's maybe it's a longer path down the journey of actually having, let's say, acquainted oneself with more automated transfer pricing. I think what we're seeing with clients in different projects is very much on the far left, in the technical automation part on the no-low code automation, which is also what Lewis will show in a second using Alteryx. Really what, projects like this would typically start by actually sitting down and looking at what are the processes, what are the things that a tax department actually carry out on a regular basis. Everything from data extraction to data cleansing to everything else that moves all the way into actual implementation. And it's often what happens is that it's like a revelation. Like here's 5 or 6 processes that we could automate more or less, I wouldn't say immediately, but close to. Some of the projects that we've done in this space require maybe 50, 75 hours of time to build something that already alleviates a multitude of that number of hours. So just to take a little bit of the complexity out of this, it's not all big and complex projects. Some of it is really, something that can be approached relatively easily. So I think with that, Lewis, I guess it's time to maybe go through a little bit more concretely what can actually be done within this automation and in this automation space.
Yes, thank you, Jens. So what we are going to present today and show you is the result of our work in different projects with different clients, and what we have been striving to achieve here is to find a solution that is flexible enough so that we can apply it to different projects, to different clients in different scenarios. As Jens was saying, it is very important to understand that the most complex solutions are not really that flexible. Once you have, for example, a full transfer pricing module coded into your ERP system, changing your TP structure becomes a much more complex task. So because of that and because of our experience, what we have decided to do is to advance in what we call the modular approach. And this modular approach is the result of the work of our transfer pricing and tax tech consultants. We have a very good group here doing great advances on that area. The good part about the modular approach is that it allows you to have a full control over your operational transfer pricing. You can go from your budget to your actuals, to your year-end, and to your compliance work, all using the same data sources, having a very clear methodology on how you implement your different transfer pricing policies, and of course, having this very clear audit trail, which means everything reconciles. We know exactly how we did the calculations. We can recreate the calculations, and every time we are challenged by tax authorities, we can basically show them, okay, this is the code, these are all the numbers, this is how they reconcile. So as Jens was saying, this is something that will give you more points in those audits. So our model approach has different parts, and all of those different engines start with a very simple part, that is the data extraction. As you can see on the slide, we have built a module that extracts data from different either ERP systems or direct extracts from your systems. This means that we are flexible to whatever system you have, whatever configuration of your extract is, and we can use that data to do all the calculations in order to implement your transfer pricing policy. But data extraction is not the most important part, I would say. The most important part is to validate that data. Because if we don't have clear data which we can trust, then whatever calculations we are doing, adjustments, pricings, implementation of TP policies is not going to be solid. So for that, we have also created a data validation engine. But this sounds probably a lot of, or very theoretical, but in reality, what it does is that it checks that when you are extracting the data, you are extracting the right kind of data. You have country codes where you need to see country codes. You have the specific entity codes or names where you are looking at them. You have clear serial numbers. You have very clear currency rates and so on.
Luis, can I stop you for a second? I think that just to hammer that point away on this data validation and data, even before looking at extraction and all the fancy things that we've talked about so far, I don't think we can emphasize enough where a project like this starts, and it kind of gets into a question that was raised earlier in the Q&A section on where does a project like this start, right? I alluded a little bit to it before on actually sitting down as a tax department or as a finance department and looking at what is it that we're doing on a day-to-day basis, who are our stakeholders, who needs data from us, who do we need data from. But even in let's say, a very immediate step after a session or a workshop like that would be to actually have a really close look at what data can you actually get your hands on. Is it the right quality? Is it trustworthy? Is it accurate? Everything around that. So it's I think we can say it in very short that it's about getting the basics right, even before looking at any of the, let's say, the more nice automation stuff that we've talked about. So we really do see, once you start opening up that discussion on, okay, do we actually understand who's owning the data that we're so dependent on? Do we understand if it's, let's say, fit for purpose? What if it's not? Who do we need to deliver data to? Do they understand how we use it and what they actually end up using it for? So it's to some extent, it's also a question of opening up that dialogue across the organization and saying, we really need to understand how this works. And then from there on, with that solid foundation, we can talk about, modular approaches and no low-code automation and everything else. Because if we put bad data into this, it will not result in what we want to achieve.
Indeed, yes. That's why we have been making a lot of emphasis in this data validation for all our projects. So those are the two main initial engines that, or modules of a general engine with which we start. And that is, of course, that has a very clear base on what Jens was talking about and Daniel as well, about mapping the processes and understanding who has data and what is the data generation process. Basically, do all your entities use the same account names? Do all the entities register the same things in those accounts, and so on and so forth? Because if there are differences, we need to be very much aware of them to implement them in our engines. Then after you have all the data that you need, you have extracted the data, you have validated it, you trust it, then you can do things with it. So that's where we have two specific modules here. The intercompany pricing, that's basically what automates the implementation of your specific transfer pricing policies. And then you can have cost allocation engines, cost sharing arrangement engines that implement those arrangements, royalties, different distribution of specific costs, and of course, pre-sale minus calculations, and what we are going to see here, sales of good transactions, where basically you price your COGS in order to reach a specific profitability. And once you have done that, that is of course what you do during the year. Then you go to the year-end adjustments. During the year, did you get close to your target profitability? If not, how much do you need to adjust different entities to get to that? So 2 modules there. And after you have done that, and you have approved all the numbers and the books are closed, then we need to extract the data, produce intercompany transaction tables, which we need for documentation and full compliance. All those modules that I'm talking about allow you to limit the number of or the amount of resources that you expend in implementing your transfer pricing, and it allows you to be fully compliant with clear audit trail. Now, why we decided that modular approach was the best way? First is because it is more cost effective. This basically can be applied in any ERP system to any client and to any type of transaction. Because we do not depend on a specific environment but we do everything outside your systems. And that also means that it doesn't matter if you have different types of transactions. We can have specific modules for those. We can deal with different ERP configurations, different extract configurations, and so on. So the typical process flow for an operational transfer pricing engine would be what you're seeing there. First, we have data extraction, that is basically on the P&L data extraction, transformation, and validation. And then we have, of course, the intercompany transaction table extraction. Those are like the two main points, something that happens in the beginning of the year or during the year, and then something that happens at the end of the year when you do your extraction for your adjustments and eventually for compliance. But then what you do with that data is the pricing and TP adjustments, those engines that we were talking about a minute ago. And that's where we can basically do the magic of automating those calculations that most probably you are currently doing by hand in Excel and without having necessarily a very clear methodology that is homogeneous across your entities. So in that regard, we limit the risks during audits. So the parts of the engine that we are going to show you today, and I'm going to focus today on the pricing engine. But if you want to fully automate a sales of good transaction between a principal and an LRD, with a very clear profitability target for LRDs, and of course they can be different between different entities. What that means is that you need a pricing engine that is doing the calculations for the different prices between your principal and your different distributors. Then you need an adjustment engine that does pretty much the same, but instead of giving you a price answer, this price should be this much for this specific good, will give you a bulk adjustment, a lump sum that you need to either transfer or charge to your different distributors. And then again, as we were talking about, then after year end, you do your extraction for the intercompany transactions.
Luis, can I stop you just for a second? Just one question to this. When you talk about principals and limited risk distributors and all that, we know what it is, and I think maybe also a lot of the audience will know. But basically, this is the idea of managed margin entities. So what Luis was talking about, if you want to manage the margin, that can potentially be done by goods pricing. So there's to set the goods pricing in a way to target the price. I think it's maybe worth touching on a bit, Luis. Is this also relevant for, let's say, non-managed margin transfer pricing models? I know the answer to it, but I think it's worth just touching on so that everybody gets a sense of the, let's say, the relevance of this to more or less everybody.
Yes, it is absolutely relevant. So in this case, for example, I can offer you an example. Here we are talking about the relation between a principal and then your managed margin distributor. So this LRD, this limited risk distributor. But if you didn't have a principal, but you had, for example, licensed distributors, so licensed manufacturers, so basically manufacturers that earn all the residual profit, and your distributors are having transactions with different manufacturers, this becomes even more important because it is much more complex to manage those transactions and those adjustments when your specific distributor doesn't have one counterpart, but let's say 5, 10 different counterparts. What is the share of the specific adjustment that should go to one manufacturer and not the other? What is the specific pricing for goods coming from one manufacturer and what is the specific price coming from another? That makes this very powerful in terms of the different types of transfer pricing models we can implement, but also in terms of how much we can help in saving resources. Now, having said that, I would like to explain a little bit on what is the intercompany transaction structure doing, because in the interest of time, I'm not going to go through that one. This intercompany transaction basically, as I was saying, extracts data and then runs a lot of checks and creates a very clear clear report on where could be problems in your data. And if your data is very consistent, then it just accepts it and you have a report on that. But an intercompany transaction extractor allows you to produce those tables that go in your transfer pricing documentation. I can imagine that in many cases, what happens is that you extract a lot of different transactions, and then through filters and different formulas in Excel, you manage to find the value of the transaction for each one of the entities. We can automate that and the production of all that those data and tables by using this engine. We also allow you to calculate the value of the transaction in different currencies. So, for example, you have a functional currency that is euro, but for example, you have a distributor in Hungary, then you will immediately have those transactions in foreign, their currency, and so on. So this is really important because it helps you to save time and have very clear data. Yes. Now, let me just go through the engines and what they do. I will share my screen and show you a demo on how we have envisioned this and how we have implemented it.
And I think is it fair to? I think it's fair to say that the example that we want to show now is a bit complex because we want to show the engine room of the solution that we built. So this will not be the thing that you will see if you work with this solution. You will get more of a very user-friendly interface, more of an app-style way of working with it. But we really wanted to show you how the engine room of this type of low, no-code softwares actually work and what it can do within the space of transfer pricing. Yeah.
Yes, you're right. This is going to look a little bit complex because I will show you different Excels with numbers everywhere, but also because I will show you what lives inside the engines, basically the code, the low code part of the engines. But as Daniel was saying, yes, when we deliver this to clients, we package this as an app in a way that basically what you do is you double click on a link and then you say where your data lives and the engine runs and produces your output. So don't be scared by what you see. This is not the final implementation that you will get eventually. Now, going through this, as we were talking a second ago, this is implementing a limited risk distributor and principal sales of good transaction. What you're looking at here and what you see in general in this kind of transactions is that you have a budget that has priced your intercompany COGS, or basically your intercompany transaction. That is what you have, your COGS, and you have that in the budget. And if you have that budget and it is well implemented, your transfer pricing policy, in this case, we are looking at a return on sales transaction. That return on sales that you see in the budget should be, in theory, the same as your transfer pricing policy. So, of course, what we see in the budget, and we have done these calculations by hand, is that you don't need to do any changes in the adjustment. You can see the adjustment is 0 here, and your extra price, that is the change that you would need to do or to implement in that intercompany sales of good transaction is 0. Now, what happens when you start to see actuals is that most of the time, those actuals do not fit precisely with your budget. So you start to see divergence between those numbers, which allows you or opens the place for the need of an adjustment to basically make those actuals that you are seeing more closer to your TV policy. And what we're seeing here is that with only 3 months, we have just created data out of the blue. And what we are seeing is that the observed return on sales is already 9.5%. So we need to take it down so to make it close to our target. Again, those calculations done by hand, which are in this case very simple, allows you to reach that extra price that you would need, to have a higher COGS and therefore a lower EBIT margin. And in this case, would be that you have to increase your intercompany pricing in around 4%. Now, how this engine looks is this. What you're seeing here is the different parts of the engine, and the engine starts by, of course, importing the data, then reorganizing it in a way that the computer can do some calculations. What you see in this box is that we are deleting zeros. When we are saying zeros, it's because we have actuals and budget. So we need to take those two sources of data and make one forecast, in this case, 3 + 9 forecast. So we delete those columns that are zeros, or the actuals that haven't occurred, and then we merge them and do the calculations. And if I run this, I selected already Q1. If I run this, what I'm going to find is an output that will look like this, but with numbers. So let me just close this one and run the engine, and we should be reaching that 3.94 number of adjustment that we were just seeing. So if I show you here what just happened is that you see it just updated a minute ago. If I open this file, what I'm going to get is exactly that. So this has run the calculation in a couple of seconds for one specific entity. And of course, we can loop this for many entities. So you would get this synthetic P&L, which allows you to know what is the extra COGS, what is the extra price that you need to change for the entities. It of course can be positive and negative depending on what is the profitability that you're seeing on your distributors. So that means that in a couple of minutes, you would be able to calculate all your adjustments and pricing for all your entities. And this means also that you can do it more often during the year, not only every quarter or every semester, but you can even do it every month if this allows you to be much more in target.
Luis, I think it's maybe worth, because I'm wondering whether the Alteryx workflow that you just saw will probably be new to maybe a few people in the audience. And I guess two things to that. It looks more complex than it is.
Yes.
So from a perspective of our internal kind of, let's say, skills development, we've upskilled a very large part of our tax and legal practice in the actual use of Alteryx. Mm-hmm. So it's not something that, it's not like learning a new language. It's something that, with a bit of effort, you can get under the hood of actually how to use Alteryx. We're doing a few client trainings, basically sitting down and going through how do we work with Alteryx and how can that specific client maybe upskill him or herself to start and lift some of these tasks internally within the company. So it looks more complex than it is. And it's really just a new way of thinking. I think a second point to that, what Luis was showing, or maybe is also still showing, is on screen here, all of those small icons that you're seeing are effectively data steps. It's either cleaning or merging or, let's say, further manipulation of the data. And in the end, it can also generate the output that you would need to achieve those margins. So for those of you who's used to maybe interacting with finance departments on saying, I'd like these intercompany prices to be invoiced to our local legal entities, those invoices can be generated automatically out of these workflows. And to Daniel's earlier point on audit trail, what we typically see in some transfer pricing audits is, okay, then the German authorities have the great idea of asking, why was the margin 5 and not 4? And then you have to go back a few years. Maybe the person that was responsible for pricing at that time has left the company. And it's really difficult to figure out, okay, what's the data source that led to this, let's say, lack of precise margin? What happened? What did the invoice look like? Who was basically doing all the work? If you have a workflow like this, it would be a case of opening it up and taking each step and seeing, okay, what actually happened to the source data and what did it end up looking like? So it is quite a powerful, also, if someone asks you, what did you do? You can almost get to a point where you say, here's the audit, here's the workflow, you can audit that. Mm-hmm. So just to make it, I think, a little bit clear that it is powerful.
That is very important to say. And so maybe a little bit of word on what is Alteryx. Alteryx is basically a new way of working the same manner you would work with data in Excel. The only thing that it does, and that's why it looks so crazy, is that it takes all the steps that you would do in an Excel file. Let's say we're talking this calculation for intercompany pricing, and it does it in a way that you can save those steps. So, for example, if I want to know the revenue for this Model 3 plus 9, I have to go and sum this part of the actuals and then the rest of the year. What Alteryx does is that it allows me to, let's say, program this with a couple of icons saying, okay, take all the columns that are not zero and then add them to the rest of the columns in the actual, in the budget. So I can basically tell step by step, how do you need to do the calculation in order to get to the result that I want. And once you have done that, and that's why we say this is very important for audits, you have a very clear methodology, you can replicate it anytime you want, and you can be sure that what you are implementing in your intercompany pricing is exactly what you said you were going to do in your transfer pricing policies. So that was the engine on intercompany transaction, intercompany pricing. And of course, you shouldn't expect just to see numbers here. We would couple this with some visualization tools that we showed last time in the last webinar, where you can follow those different profitabilities, where you see the different adjustments that you're seeing, where you're seeing the different changes in pricing. So it is very visual and easy to understand. Now, after you have done this during the year, we were saying, then you come to the intercompany adjustments when you need them, the year-end adjustments. This is pretty much the same as you were doing before, but the output of this is slightly different compared to what you were seeing in the pricing, because we here don't want to create a change in the intercompany pricing, but to have or to generate a lump sum that is the adjustment. So it takes the same data that I showed you in the beginning, but now it just creates you this synthetic P&L where you know exactly what would be the adjustment for your pure LRD. And once you have the adjustment, what happens is that you come to your general ledger, which will look pretty much like this. A lot of transactions all the way down during the year for different months, for different transactions between different entities, etc. And then you have an adjustment, of course, for this specific transaction that we just did. What our intercompany transactions table structure does is that it takes this huge matrix that you see in your general ledger, and this has been built on a specific ERP system. But once you get that, then you run the engine and you end up having the transactions table. So this is ready to go in your transfer pricing documentation. It fully reconciles because the data is coming directly from your ERP system. So that means that you are very much bulletproof when it comes to audits and the implementation of TV policies. And with that, I guess it is time for some Q&A session.
Yeah. I think, Louis, we've actually managed to cover the questions that have come up as part of the discussion so far, and we're also, I think, approaching time. I guess that actually gets us to closing the webinar, unless there's anything else that you guys would like to add, Louis and Daniel.
I think I'm done.
Okay, cool. But then I thank everyone for joining today's session. We hope we've at least partly inspired you guys to explore operational transfer pricing in your own business and in your own time. It can sometimes come across as a little bit complex. I hope we haven't overcomplicated things and actually tried to, let's say, bring out some of that mystery from it. Before we close the session, just a little bit of advertising for our next webinar, where we'll be joined by Romero Tavares from our office in Sao Paulo. He'll cover the recent changes made to Brazilian transfer pricing regulations, which, the way I read it, promise to be a little bit of a game changer for businesses with operations in Brazil. So hopefully we'll see many of you again for that webinar. Look forward to hosting it and wish you all a great day and the rest of the week ahead. Thank you.